going on, guys? Welcome back to this week's video. Now I know...
Let me explain. So last week, my family and I were in Fort Lauderdale, Florida for their 50th birthdays. It was a great week. We went with my cousins, we went jet skiing, everything was going swimmingly. Get it? Until I was standing still on my jet ski talking to our tour guide on my left, and on my right, my cousin decided to run up on me and crush my leg between my jet ski and hers. As a result, I've been hobbling around as if I'm just like pulling dead weight. Here's my hospital band if you were curious. So this week, obviously, it would have been really tough for me to go out and get all the supplies for the last retry video. I'm still gonna do it just next month when I'm a little bit recovered. But for this week, instead of missing a whole video together, I had this one saved from a few months ago. It just never fit anywhere in my upload schedule, so enjoy it. I think it's a good video, and we'll be back to normal next week for our last retry. Until then, peace, enjoy.
If you can remember back a couple months ago, I attempted to make a Rubik's Cube cake, and God did that take a long time. I tried to make a homemade vanilla cake, a homemade black buttercream icing, and homemade fondant dyed 6 different colors. It just was not a fun time. And now, because apparently I like to torture myself, we are back once again for some cake. My girl Yolanda over on How to Cake It, who is honestly probably the best, most talented, original baker on this entire website, and that's saying a lot. Now in her original video, she did a YouTube app, she did a Instagram app, and an emoji of herself. I'm definitely not doing that third one. But what I'm gonna do today is the 2 apps I use the absolute most on my phone, YouTube and Twitter. And again, for a second time, I am making everything from scratch. I got my work cut out for me today, so let's get right into it. Now firstly, completely off camera, I whipped up some marshmallow fondant. It's a really simple recipe with just some water, some mini marshmallows, and powdered sugar. If you want to see how I made it, you can go back to my Rubik's Cube video and watch that one. I made the same recipe. It came out just as good, so I figured you didn't need to see it again. You do need to refrigerate them overnight though, so just keep that in mind. Next up, I tried to work on the buttercream frosting. And of course, Yolanda's on her website is even more difficult than the one I tried last time. Now I started by grabbing some granulated sugar, a half cup of water, a bunch of eggs, a whole pound or 4 sticks of unsalted butter, and some vanilla extract. In my small saucepan, I first started by throwing 400 grams of the granulated sugar, along with the half cup of water, mix them together, and you have to allow them to heat up and start simmering. Now last time I tried to whip up egg whites, you guys made fun of me because I tried to use a water bottle to extract all the yolks from the egg whites, and I ended up messing up the whole recipe. Today, it's different. I have this weird egg white extractor tool that apparently clips on the side of a bowl, and when you crack an egg in, okay, no. Literally, not even one egg worked before I broke the yolk and ruined the batch. Nice. So I just ended up resorting to the old-fashioned way, which many of you ever so kindly suggested in the comments, and separated 8 yolks from their whites. Now this is one of those recipes where I really could use a stand mixer, but of course I do not have one, so I used my hand mixer and began whipping these up. While you are doing so, keep an eye on that candy thermometer, because once your sugar and water mixture hits 230 degrees, you have to begin to slowly add that mixture into your whipping egg whites. Apparently you're supposed to leave your mixer running and slowly add this in because it cooks the eggs. Now after about 15 or 17 minutes of mixing this, I just realized it was not looking right. It was kind of like gritty and not really fluffy at all like Yolanda's, but I'm hoping it will eventually come together in the end. That hope would never come true. I slowly added in all 4 sticks of my room temperature unsalted butter, and this did end up making it look a little bit better, so I added in the vanilla as well, and who am I kidding, this still looks like shit. Let's just throw it in the fridge for a few hours and see if anything good happens. Now while that's in the fridge, we can begin to work on the main part of this cake. There's a ghost in my house. Now, in the meantime, we can begin to work on the main part of this cake, the cake. Just like Yolanda in her video, I'm using her ultimate chocolate cake recipe, which seems pretty dang good. Now I like to refer to baking recipes like this one, the dishwashing nightmare, because you end up using so much supplies, everything gets filthy and covered in flour and everything else. And you will see why shortly. In your first bowl, you want to sift all your dry ingredients. I gave that an extra little whisk just to make sure all those dry ingredients were thoroughly combined, and I set that one off to the side for now. In bowl number 2, I grabbed an absolute ton of that cocoa powder. I think it was 1.5 cups to 2 cups, and then a bunch of boiling water. Stir this until that powder all dissolves. I feel like I'm making like a hot chocolate or something right now. In your third bowl, you can add in all of your sugar. I know this seems like a ton, but we're making a bunch of cakes. And then your oh, son of a... God, you're supposed to add your butter. I'm sorry, I messed up. I added eggs first. Let's just pretend that did not happen. I added in the butter slowly and mixed it all in. And after I added in all the rest of the butter and mixed for about 10 minutes, I added in the remainder of my eggs, 2 at a time until those were incorporated as well. This is the thing about baking. It's so precise and scientific, and a lot of luck is involved, I feel. Like the slightest little thing wrong could just ruin your entire project. So all the professional bakers out there, like Yolanda and everyone, you have my respect. I will never judge or criticize you. Now all we have to do to finish off this batter is rotate between adding your dry ingredients and the hot cocoa water mixture until the entirety of both bowls are added in and your mixture is looking pretty good like this. Now just for this recipe, I went out and grabbed some new square 8x8 pans, which are hopefully non-stick and going to work for this recipe. So I filled those up about half or 3/4 of the way and then threw them into a 350-degree oven for about an hour. Now at the 50-minute mark, I took them out and very quickly realized that these things not only didn't rise very well, but they definitely didn't need an hour either. They were like on the verge of being overcooked at this 50-minute mark. Now once all 3 of my cakes were baked and cooled off, I began to start carving them up. I split that third bigger one in half, tried to level off the top a little bit and set it aside for now. And then with the original 2, I tried to level off the top a little bit. I didn't want to take off too much just because I feel like the layers will end up being so thin. And I'm hoping it won't matter too much if I leave a little bit of a bulge on top. But now is where our homemade, fresh, delicious buttercream comes into play. I took it out of the fridge and it looks odd. I mean, it's okay. It's very like gritty and definitely doesn't look like Yolanda's version. I don't know what went wrong. Probably the sugar, knowing me. This looks kind of gross, to be honest. But once I did that for both cakes, I threw them back into the fridge for about a half hour to chill down. And in the meantime, I grabbed my white fondant and began to roll it out across the countertop. Now, I first tried to use some powdered sugar as a non-stick base to roll this out, but I think my house is just so humid and it's so hot in here that this just ended up getting sticky and gross anyway. So I ended up having to use some shortening left over. Now I had to do this next step kind of fast because the fondant was just falling apart, so I tried to drape it over my cake really quick and smooth out the sides. It's still not looking pretty, but maybe, you know, it'll come together at some point. And finally, to finish this one off, I just rolled out some more fondant and oh my god, I forgot to dye it red. What I attempted to do here was dilute some gel food coloring with some water and paint it on. Again, it's not looking the best, but I threw it on the cake and it got all stretched out. I'm stressed, guys. This is terrible. Now, because of my rising stress levels from this recipe, I had to just put everything aside, leave it for the night, and I got back to it the next day. The following morning, I grabbed the white fondant that I had left over and dyed it red the right way. It's still not as deep of a red as I would like, but it's definitely better than I had yesterday. I tried to trace out the YouTube logo by hand with a toothpick at first, and that looked pretty good, so I cut it out with the knife and then cut out the little triangle in the middle. Again, this looks okay, but I'm just scared it's gonna get stretched out when I try to put it on the cake. And overall, this cake didn't end up looking too terrible. For the next cake though, I grabbed my huge massive white fondant, threw down some royal blue food coloring, and once I added that all in, it turned out to be the perfect light blue Twitter color. For the second time, I smoothed out some vegetable shortening over my countertop and tried to roll out this blue, which is definitely looking better than the previous cake. So I again draped it over my second cake and tried to smooth out all the sides. And although I don't love the super shiny top from all the shortening that's now stuck on it, this does look pretty good. The very last thing I did was grabbed the leftover white fondant I had, again rolled it out, and tried to trace out the Twitter logo off a picture on my phone with a toothpick yet again. And my idea here was if I had cut it out on a plate and then threw it in the freezer after I cut it apart, maybe it would harden up and be easier to place on my cake. And what do you know, that is exactly what ended up happening. I finished my second cake off by pressing that Twitter logo down into the blue fondant, and I am very pleased with how this one came out. Overall, I'm not too upset. It was a lot of work and a lot of supplies, but considering how badly my last cake went, I cannot really complain today. Now you guys gotta give it up for me a little bit. For someone who's not a huge fan or definitely does not bake often, this little cross section here does not look too shabby. Now, will it taste good is a whole different question. Please, for the love of God, let this taste edible. I am not mad at this. Now, like I said earlier, the buttercream is not all that pleasant on the mouthfeel. It's not very smooth or creamy at all. But the taste is there. Like, I'm very happy with how it tastes. Fondant is just very sweet marshmallows with some dye in it, so there's nothing really to say about that. But the cake is great too. I don't know if I've ever made a homemade chocolate cake from scratch, but I'm like really impressed with how this is. It's very dense, but it's definitely not dry or like too heavy to eat or anything like that. Now, of course, the YouTube cake is essentially the same one as this, just with different color fondant on the top, so it's not really worth trying both of them. But I, for one, am very pleased with how these came out, so I'm gonna have to give them a 8.762 out of 10. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, leave a like on this for me right down in the description. If you have a recipe you want me to try out, leave that down in the comments. Tweet at me, DM me on Instagram, do whatever you gotta do. I wanna see your suggestions. And other than that, have an absolutely awesome rest of your week, and I'll see you right back here